Hello there. It's been a minute. I tried to record this up in my new office so I could show off my incredible setup, but literally my mouse stopped working and needed to be charged. My keyboard died, and it was just a sign that maybe either one, I don't need to be working right now, or two, let me get resourceful. So I came downstairs and just plugged in my simple mic setup, and here we are. I was super not nervous, but a little hesitant to hit record because this has been such an interesting season, even just with my relationship with marketing and my relationship with creating content. There is this duality that I feel like I've been wrestling with of hey, I'm not being consistent enough. And a huge part of that is I used to be producing 2 posts a day on Instagram, publishing at least one, if not two emails per week for my newsletter. I was publishing 1 to 2 episodes a week on the podcast, and to be in a season still, I feel like I'm just now really getting my groove of quote unquote working again since taking my sabbatical, where I'm now producing the podcast in seasons. And, I haven't recorded a new podcast in a couple of months, and here we are now. And there's really interesting, this mental chatter that goes on. And I think it's a good place to start this episode today with a quick update, because it's I've produced over 250 podcast episodes. I've gone live on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, over 1,000 live stream videos in my career. And when you choose to take a pause or adjust your pace when it comes to creating content, you will still feel resistance sometimes with hitting publish again. And even though you have already put in so many reps, you can still feel this level of discomfort, or you have this getting on the bike again for the first time, even though it's not your first time. It's an interesting dynamic I've been in. It's something that I've noticed a lot of my private one-on-one clients kind of struggle with when they delegate all of their marketing, remove themselves completely from their messaging, and then realize their voice is still required and they have to show up and have to record and have to contribute again. It's an interesting dynamic to step back in. And that's how I feel right now. And it's just an interesting thing because I had to really reframe some of this to myself, even just this past week, of that, you're not being inconsistent. Your pace just looks different now. And I really have to remind myself of the facts. I've been booked out since I came back and started offering private one-on-one coaching. And it's the level of marketing output that I used to produce is just it's no longer necessary. And that's a really interesting thing to give myself permission to receive, accept, and allow my pace to adjust accordingly. When you shift your business model, when you shift the type of offers that you sell, when you go through these transitions, sometimes we'll change our offers, but we won't adapt our approach to lead generation marketing. We won't adapt our strategy to align with what the new offers are. And it's a really, really interesting thing to be in. I think I'm starting to accept it, but I just noticed some resistance when I sat down to record today. And I'm like, you know what? Let me let you in on this, because it's a part of the process. And when you shift from, working with 150 high ticket clients a year to working with 12 to 20 per year, the level of scale that I used to need is literally no longer required. And you really, this is something I just got back from hosting my mastermind retreat last week with my clients, and was actually a really big topic of conversation is what level, your systems need to align with the level of scale that's necessary for the season of business that you're in. And yes, you can have the, most complex project management systems and the most complex, content repurposing strategies. And you can have, the most, glamorous or high production level of content output, but you really have to ask yourself, is that level of scale necessary for the season of business that I'm in and the type of results I'm looking to get? So that's a quick update on where I'm at, what I've been wrestling with, what I'm working through. And I'll kind of segue into just how the business model is right now. And then I'm going to just go into some Q&A I had from Instagram. A lot of you submitted questions. Since I said we're bringing the podcast back this month, and, I'm going to answer some of your questions before we get too deep into this season, into this next series of the podcast. But the next series of the podcast, let me give you just a little teaser of what you can expect over the next few episodes. And then I'll go into answering some of these questions and giving a state of the union of where my business model is at. and how it's just been with the transition. But this next season of the podcast, I'm going to be titling it The Perception Gap. And the reason being is because there is this common theme that I am noticing right now. It's something I also wrestled with when coming back into business and just adjusting my business model, is that it seems to be this gap between those of us who have traditionally marketed based off of our intellect primarily, that very education, knowledge-based, how to focus in our marketing. And there's usually this perception gap between people respecting us and people knowing that we know our stuff. And there's this gap in the problem that we know how to solve and the way in which people perceive us. And that's the gap that I really want us to close. And I really look at the perception gap as really like this triangle effect, where there is your intellect, which many of us, our intellect is our armor. We lead with what we know. We lead with our knowledge. We lead with our degrees. We lead with our credentials. We lead with our titles. Many of us have built our businesses based off of our intellect and the educational approach of what we can teach. And that's like pretty much 100% of how we present ourselves. And people have historically, a lot of us, myself included, has paid us primarily based off of the trust that they felt and the respect that they had for the intellect that we can convey. But what I'm noticing is these other two parts of the triangle that are missing is, yes, your intellect is required, but also your identity and how you showcase your identity, what you let people into, and how your identity aligns with the values in which your ideal clients have. And then there's image. And I don't mean just image in the sense of like how you present yourself in your attire, your makeup, your hair. That is a part of it though. But I mean also image in how you view yourself. Your sense, how regulated your nervous system is, like your sense of self-image, how comfortable you are in your own skin, how safe you feel with your own opinions and your own point of view and your own perspective. And I feel like those are the three aspects of intellect, identity, and image that really close the perception gap that our prospects and the people that we want to be hiring us, that's the gap we need to close. In order to establish that credibility, create that trust in today's landscape. And I really do feel like we're in a different season right now in 2025, the way people are making buying decisions. We're dealing with a more sophisticated market in addition to what's going on politically and economically. People are in a much more scared state, a more fearful state. People are a lot more discerning when they're making their buying decisions, and their approach to making those buying decisions and the discernment they're using, the things that they're looking for to reduce the perceived risk around where they're making buying decisions, I really feel like is a trifecta of all three of those elements. 2019 to 2022, I feel like, especially in the digital marketing, online education, coaching space, online space or whatever, your intellect was really enough to get the sale. And I feel like now, yes, your intellect is required, but if you're selling a more sophisticated problem, if you are selling to a more sophisticated buyer, if you're selling on a more premium end, if you're just rinsing and repeating messaging from 2 or 3 years ago and you have not refined your messaging to meet the perceived risk your buyers feel today, even though if you're selling to the same person, but that person is not making buying decisions the same way, like if your messaging is not caught up to that, and if you have primarily led your marketing from an intellect-based approach, you really don't let people know who you are, where you stand, like what your identity is, that your identity and your image are not things that you have really poured into your front face marketing and your front face messaging. That's where the gap is. And that's what the next handful of episodes are going to be about, is just how do you close that perception gap and really that trifecta of identity, image, and intellect, how those three things need to work together to reduce the perceived risk that buyers are feeling as it relates to how they're making buying decisions today. That's what I'm noticing for myself. That's what's been working for me. And that's what's been working for my private clients. So I'm excited to dive into that in the next handful of episodes and in this season of the podcast. And I think that's a natural segue of like somebody asked, like, what's the state of the union? What's it been like selling primarily private one-on-one coaching? And what is how have you shifted to adjust into that? And I gave some insight to that at the very beginning of this episode. But the thing that I'm noticing for me is that I went from selling 12 clients into a $15,000 to $18,000 offer in a day to now I'm working with 12 to 15 clients in a year. And it's a very different dynamic. I think too, when you transition from selling a curriculum-based program where there is one outcome, there is one pathway that you lead people through, that's a very different approach to marketing and selling than private one-on-one. In a group curriculum-based program, I was selling a promise. In private one-on-one, I am really selling a philosophy. Yes, there's still outcomes that we achieve, but intellect alone is not the reason why somebody's going to be willing to hire me for a 6-month private one-on-one coaching. They are, yes, my intellect and their ability to trust in my lived experience and my ability to advise them based off of credible, relevant experience that I have is absolutely part of the equation. But the biggest thing that I noticed when I shifted to private one-on-one versus selling, when I shifted from selling my intellectual property, here's this one outcome. You're really only hiring me for the knowledge transfer that I'm going to give you, a skill that I can help you develop. And I'm giving you one formula to follow, a very step-by-step linear path, to people hiring me private one-on-one, where it's yes, they're hiring the intellect, but I also get to see them at a very human level. They are buying into an identity alignment. They're buying into an identity just as much as they're buying into intellect. And they're also buying into image just as much as they're buying into intellect. And usually the private one-on-one clients, the reason why I've been blessed, to be booked out. I've been blessed where 90% of my clients will renew for a second term. I have some clients I've been working with now for 4 or 5 years. Since I've come back with private one-on-one, 12 clients I've worked with, 11 of them have renewed. The reason why they tell me they choose to renew is that yes, I'm proud of the results they were able to make, but they tell me that the reason why they stay is because of how much more they're able to trust themselves. And that to me is really an identity and an image outcome, more so than just I was able to learn this new skill type of outcome. And I think that's a really important thing I've been noticing. And I think a really important factor for you as you're listening is you really need to understand the type of business that you're in. And you really need to understand that even though coaching, quote unquote, might be the umbrella, or online education, quote unquote, is the umbrella, when you shift offers from a digital course to group coaching to private one-on-one coaching, and you shift the perceived risk that a prospect feels as it relates to each one of those offers, and you also shift the main criteria that somebody's making a buying decision on. A digital course, it's probably more of an impulse-based purchase. They're buying one tactical skill set. It's very intellectual in nature. When you're selling maybe a 4 to 5 figure coaching program, it's kind of a hodgepodge. They're buying education, they're buying coaching, they're buying both dynamics, they're buying community. That's a different thing a different value proposition that they're hiring into. When it's private one-on-one, they're buying identity alignment. They want to know not only can you help them achieve their outcome, but they care just as much in the process that you're going to walk them through to achieve that outcome. And what I mean by that is my values, how I live my life, the process of my identity factors in so much, because there's a million people you could hire as a private one-on-one coach, and there's a million people who might be achieving the outcome that you want, but you want to know, are they doing it in a way that aligns with the lifestyle that you want to live? And that's been the biggest thing, because and I think from a marketing and a lead generation and a messaging standpoint, that has been one of the, I don't want to call it a challenge, but that was one of the biggest lessons I had to learn, is that I can't keep marketing the way that I used to. I can't keep marketing on my intellect alone anymore. I really started noticing that just trying to sell the how-tos and the tactical stuff wasn't going to work anymore. I realized that people were not buying because of purely my credibility. I had to stop marketing like I had something to prove. I had to really reapproach like how I marketed, how I message. I needed to lead with more storytelling. I needed to lead more with what my identity is. And part of that is I had to really get clear on what aspects of my identity do I feel comfortable monetizing, and what aspects of my identity do I feel comfortable magnifying through my marketing. Because one thing I know to be true is that when you are selling your intellectual property, and when you are working with in close proximity with your clients, like in a one-on-one or an intimate mastermind, your personal brand is a requirement. That is a responsibility that you bear as the CEO. You cannot delegate your perspective. You cannot delegate your identity. You cannot delegate your messaging. You can delegate the distribution of those things, but you cannot delegate the source. You are the source. And I just really realized that, like, I had to get clear on those things. And then I had to really get comfortable with, okay, I have to lead more with an identity-based messaging approach, not just an intellectual-based approach to my marketing. And I have to figure out what those lines exist where I feel safe managing and keeping what needs to be private, but also feeling like I can create a level of connection with my audience at an identity level in order to facilitate the trust and credibility necessary for them to feel comfortable hiring me private one-on-one. And that's kind of what this season is really going to be diving into. I'm actually in the process right now of creating a new course. It's going to be called Market Like a CEO. And it's going to be really a course on messaging. Like, how do you really start to infuse more identity-based messaging into your content when you are a CEO? Like, we are not creating content like influencers, and really understanding that distinction. So if you are interested in that, it is something that I'll be rolling out in the next couple of weeks. You can join the wait list. I'll leave the link in the show notes. So that's kind of where I'm at business-wise. It's been a really interesting dynamic. And going back to this whole debacle that I've been feeling around consistency, it's like, it's been really gratifying because even though in my business, I guess, how should I say this? It's like I'm really grateful that I'm allowing my business to be in service to me just as much as I am in service to it. And that I'm allowing my business to adjust its pace for this season. Like, I've given my entire life, I feel like my whole life, it feels like, up until this past year and a half, where work was the number one priority. My health, my nutrition, my fitness, my well-being, my personal life, my love life, like my friendships, everything took a back burner to work. And when you've been doing that for decades, I had to be mindful of the language that I was using, because it's like I'm not being consistent. Just in this season, my nervous system, I'm being so consistent on making sure I'm well regulated. I'm being so consistent on titrating my nervous system. I'm being so consistent with showing up for myself, my health, my nutrition, making sure my stress levels are managed. I'm being so consistent with managing my boundaries and communicating my needs and giving myself permission to receive the things I need to satisfy my needs. I've been so consistent in that area. And I have to remind myself that, like, in different seasons, different things take priority, and that's 1000% okay. I used to really think that, oh, if I slow my pace or if I adjust my pace, people are going to lose respect and lose credibility. And I really had to think about, who are all the people that I admire? Who are all the greats and the OGs who've been doing this decades and decades? And when they choose to take breaks, how do I feel about them? And I think about Myleik Teele, who I think about her podcast and how she's shown up. It's been in waves. Like, there are times where she's producing every single week, and there are seasons when we don't hear from her for months. I don't lose respect for that. If anything, I respect it even more, because it's like, one, you've built a financial safety net, and you've built enough safety in your world, both financially, you're well-resourced, where one, you can take a pause, and two, that I have to respect you because you're willing to give yourself permission to do it. If anything, adjusting your pace does not diminish your credibility. And even in my experience of coming back into work and asking clients why they choose to hire me, one of the common threads is because I saw you take a sabbatical. One, I want to know, like, how you put yourself in a financial position where that could have even been a choice. Two, I've seen the energy in which you came back with. I want to know, how are you resourcing yourself in that way? And what are all the things that you're doing to be well-resourced in that way, to still be able to take care of yourself while giving yourself permission to show up and redesign your business to be in full support of your lifestyle? And I think that is just something that I have to remind myself of. And I think just as the eldest daughter type, the super type A, the perfectionist, the person that's used to primarily function in survival mode. When you are your own safety net, it can feel really terrifying to adjust your pace when the pace at which you were running at before is what led to your success. And I'm really reworking not just the cognitive understanding and the intellectual understanding, but the safety I feel in my body, that like I can still maintain the level of success that is enough for me and also broaden my definition of what success is. Because before, success was just about productivity and how much I could produce, versus now my success is all encompassing of like how well regulated is my nervous system? How am I meeting all of my needs outside of productivity? That is not just work related. How nurtured are the relationships in my life that matter to me? In addition to revenue is now just like one line item. It's not the only line item that I'm measuring my success on. And I'm really grateful for that. And I'm still working on finding safety in my nervous system and my body around that, not just understanding that concept intellectually. So that's where I'm at. So let me pull up some more questions you guys asked from Instagram stories. A few of you, Andrea and Marion, asked about my LASIK surgery. Guys, I got LASIK surgery. Okay. Part of my glow up over the past few years has included getting my eyebrows microbladed. I did that back in 2018. It's bananas because I've never had to get a touch up. People always ask like, Jay, your eyebrows are so perfect. I'm like, baby, they're perfect because I paid for them. But I'm just very lucky that my skin holds ink well because I got an ombre micro needling type of situation. So it's more of a tattoo on my face, which sounds crazy saying that out loud, but I've never had to get a touch up and my ink just doesn't fade. So I know that's not normal, but I got that back in 2018. The next thing I wanted to glow up on was getting Invisalign, and I got that about 2 years ago. Has it been 2 years? Yeah, it's been about 2 years now. I got Invisalign done. And the next part of my glow up was getting LASIK. And I started wearing glasses back in middle school. And I got my LASIK done this year. And I really wish I would have done LASIK years ago. Just the idea of eye surgery was terrifying. I'm like, what in the world? I have no idea. But when I went in for my first consult and they really broke down what the process was going to be like, it was a 15-minute procedure. And you get the LASIK done. You have to like put these eye drops in your eyes, like this antibiotic medication for like the week leading up to your LASIK surgery. You can't wear your contacts leading up because you want your eyes to be as lubricated as possible. You get the LASIK done, 15 minutes, you're over. You basically take a volume and they tell you to sleep for the rest of the day after surgery. And that night, when I woke up after I slept all day, I could see. And the next morning, I went back in for my visit, 20/20 vision. I went in a week later, I have 15/20 vision. That is better than 20/20. And it was money well spent. It's still kind of weird because every single night you're used to like having to take your contacts out. Every single night I'm like, man, I can't believe I don't have to take my contacts out. I'm like, people have been just running around living life without just being able to see like this. It's just one of those things you take for granted. But the experience was absolutely incredible. I went to the San Diego LASIK Institute. If you are in San Diego, they have an office in San Diego and one up in Irvine, up in Orange County. Definitely do your research. Go get multiple consultations, read reviews, do your research before going to get it done. Because yes, it is eye surgery, but I'm so glad I did it. I wish I would have done it sooner. Like people said that you might have dry eyes afterwards. I have nothing. Like when they said my recovery was very, very quick. There was like maybe 3 or 4 days after LASIK, and maybe for the first week, you're supposed to keep putting these eye drops in, just like normal lubricating eye drops. So I did that for the first week like I was instructed, but I've never had to use eye drops since. I don't have any like negative side effects. My eyes are never dry. For the first 2 weeks or so, you will notice just like eye fatigue, which I think was actually probably good because you don't realize how often like you're scrolling on a screen or looking at a TV or whatever. So like your eyes are just like learning how to adjust like perception and distance and things like that for the first few weeks. But 10 out of 10 recommend, and absolutely love who I went to. They were phenomenal, like 10 out of 10 facility. So that was my LASIK journey. Kia asked, how do you find love as a successful woman? Y'all have been asking me a lot of questions about love since I got divorced. You've seen me, well, you didn't see me dating because I never showcased that season on Instagram or online, but now seeing me get engaged and preparing for a wedding. Honestly, I think as a successful woman, when it comes to love, some of the most successful women I know are married. But so I don't think like success is a barrier to you finding a soulmate. But I do think that if you are hyper independent, you have function in a scarcity based mindset for an extended period of your life. If you, every time you get heartbroken, you go get another degree or another certification, I do think there's an opportunity to see and recognize what part of your healing journey are you wanting away from. And when I think about the healing journey, quote unquote, like I really, for me at least, it was like, what parts of yourself are you not allowing yourself to grieve? And when I got divorced, one of the things that I did after my divorce, while I was on my sabbatical, I took a self-love, grief, and heartbreak course. And I really just, I knew there was parts of myself that I was not allowing myself to have a relationship with, I guess is the best way to say it. And I'm just like, okay, I've gone to talk therapy. I've done traditional therapy. I have read the books. I have done the podcast. I have done a lot of coaching. I've done a lot of therapy, but there's still something that I am avoiding. And one thing that heartbreak and grief course really taught me is that there's lots of things that I never allowed myself to grieve. Like grief was not an emotion that I had a relationship with. And anger, sure. Rage, sure. Sadness, sure. But I realized that I had a severe pattern of self-abandonment. And I never have labeled myself as a people pleaser, but I wasn't people pleasing in order to be liked. I was people pleasing and I would abandon myself to make other people feel comfortable out of fear. And that's attached to my own childhood trauma and all that stuff. We're not about to trauma dump on you. But grief was a core emotion that I really never had a relationship with. And when I think about finding love really for me was like giving myself space to grieve all the things that I never gave myself the space to do. That was one, like grieving things that happened in my childhood, happened in past relationships, happened with my last marriage. That was also grieving the disappointment I felt in myself for abandoning myself as many times as I did. I had to grieve the parts that I was just disappointed in myself. And when I started really doing that work, that cracked me open in a way that was so unexpected and so powerful, because I realized that pleasure and desire and quote unquote meeting my needs in that way was something that honestly, it felt unsafe. It felt very far away. It felt almost uncomfortable. I could meet my needs from a production standpoint, to be successful, achieve the accomplishments, don't quit, be disciplined, and like a work ethic type of thing. But play, pleasure, desire, and I don't mean just like sensual play and sensual desire, but I just mean the little things. Like I would make the plan to eat healthy this week, go to the grocery store. I would meal plan. But then when it came down to it, there would be like this dissonance of giving myself the thing that I knew that I needed. And I'm like, there is a blocker there. What is that? But me establishing a relationship with grief and all the dynamics, grieving what I didn't get from other people that I wish I had, and grieving the past versions of myself that I might have been disappointed in, that was like the catalyst for a lot of unlocking a lot of love. And I think that people are always asking, people particularly have been asking me, how did you find love? And I'm like, and you hear it all the time. And now it makes sense to me. Well, the love that you are seeking, you have to really ask yourself, I feel like you're going to find the love that matches the way in which you love yourself. The depth at which you love and care for yourself, the depth at which you allow yourself to experience pleasure, desire, the depth at which you choose yourself is going to be mirrored in the depth at which you receive that in a romantic partner or even in your friendships. And I think that is really the truth. So for me, like finding love as a successful woman meant establishing a new relationship with grief and navigating that, allowing myself to feel that. It required me getting out of my head and into my body. So I stopped traditional talk therapy and I started doing more somatic practices and somatic therapy because I could intellectualize myself through anything. If something came up, I could exactly yes, that's because of this childhood wound and this attachment style, and that's a mother wound or a father wound. I could label it all day, but I was so disconnected from my body. There was like a total disconnection. I feel like getting into your body is really important. And then from there, like the romance that you seek to receive will match the romance at which you give yourself. The thing for me is like, I need to start romanticizing every aspect of my life. I started going on solo dates every single week. I still do that. I started exploring the curiosity of the things that I was really interested in and giving myself space for that. The love you seek needs to start with the love that you give yourself. So finding love as a successful woman, I just want you to start to ask yourself at how successful are you with loving on yourself, romanticizing your own life, and tapping into those things. At least that's what was most beneficial for me. And I think what's been most profound in the past 2 years of my own healing journey and navigating a lot, divorce and death and all the things. So that's what I'd have to say there. Next question, somebody asked, what's your tech stack now that you've descaled and how are you managing yourself now? I think this is a really good question. This goes back to, I think the conversation we're having at the very beginning is like your systems should match the level of scale that's needed for the season that you are in. So where I'm at right now, I do have an assistant that works probably like 7 to 10 hours per week on average, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. And outside of that, I just might hire project-based contractors depending on a project that we might have going on. But my tech stack right now is Asana. I still will use Asana for my project management, either to manage myself or to manage, now that I have an assistant, us delegating tasks back and forth. I use Airtable. Airtable is my client management system. So that's something I've been using for years. It's when people submit their applications, all the client data, anything that's not a task, but like data that we need to manage application responses, client feedback forms. My sales hub is in there, so it tracks all of our revenue by month and projections and things like that. So Airtable. I use Basecamp. That is the system I use for all of my private one-on-one coaching relationships. That's where we have all of our chats and all of our back and forth dialogue is inside of Basecamp. It allows us to track progress, track metrics, track action items, things like that. I use Slack for my mastermind. There's only a handful of clients in there, so that's just like our community hub. And then Google Suite, typical there. I use Kit, formerly known as ConvertKit, for my email management system. Love Thrivecart. That's where I do all my payment processing. I use Hello Audio for a few things now that we have a private podcast feed. Anytime you guys, if you buy my new messaging course, it'll also be on a private podcast feed just for easier accessibility. And that's pretty much it. I use Descript as well to record this podcast, and I do use Buzzsprout to host my podcast. It's very, very lean in regards to software, tech, that type of thing. When I descaled my business, I had to reimagine my entire tech stack, because the systems and the software that we were using was like for a team. I had 2 full-time team members. We had 3 or 4 program coaches that were contracted, but still like where that type of conversation needed to happen. And really, like when you are running your own show, your process to manage yourself is very different than the process that you use to manage projects and manage responsibilities with teams. So like my tech stack, I really focus on what can I purchase one time that I don't have to purchase recurring. And I really just focus on, okay, what do I actually need? Not what is a system I can scale with. I need something that matches the level of scale that my business is at. So that's that. I do also use Zoom, which I feel like is like a given. That's really it. And ChatGPT. So it's a pretty lean tech stack setup now. What do you do in your free time and how to feel comfortable with more free time? I think this is a really good question. It's such an interesting thing because many of us start our businesses so that we can work less, have more free time. And then when we get the free time, many of us are so uncomfortable in the stillness that we don't allow ourselves to enjoy the free time. We usually fill it with more work. Either fill it with more work in the business or we fill it with more responsibilities outside of work. And I think it's an interesting dynamic because I don't have kids. I think a lot of my clients do have children and they might want part-time hours. And when they're not working, it's like they're picking their kids up from school, they're dropping them off at gymnastics, they're preparing dinner, they're doing bath time routine. Like there is literally other responsibilities that they want to have the capacity to be present for. And it's kind of a given. Like you got to show up for your family. I think when you don't have kids, at least this is my experience, like when my workday is done, there is no other demanding human or a demanding responsibility that like demands my attention, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I think that even if you do have kids, regardless of what your dynamic is, like when you do have your moment that's just for you, how comfortable do you feel in your stillness? How comfortable do you feel indulging in whatever your pleasures and desires are? And that, again, like I've mentioned, has been something I've really had to establish a new relationship with myself on. So what really works for me, it's still kind of type A, but it really does help me regulate my nervous system, is that I have like a post-work playbook for myself. And I make myself like a weekly menu that's after work activities. And I give myself a menu of things I could do. And that really always helps me. It gives enough structure without feeling too structured. And I'm literally right now, when I get done recording this podcast episode, I have my calendar sitting next to me right here. I have already brainstormed some things of like, kind of like bucket list after work activity items that I want to do. And I'm going to like map it out and give myself a menu of, hey, after work, these are some options you can choose from for the week. And really what that have looked like for me, sometimes it's just as simple as like dropping packages off, doing returns, running errands. Another one of my favorite after work activities is going to the library and picking out new books. I'm really trying to get back into like drawing and doodling and just like creative expression. So I really want to have like time for arts and crafts and just like exploring new hobbies. One of my favorite after work activities also is going to Trader Joe's and getting some flowers and like making a new arrangement. Sometimes my after work activities might look like linking up with a friend and just going out to dinner. Sometimes it's me taking my book and going to a restaurant, taking myself out to dinner, reading my book at the bar, ordering a hot cocoa or some chamomile tea and just reading my book at the bar. And really, that's what it's been like for me. Sometimes it's just like walking during the sunset and just going for a really long walk. And whatever, these are not like super complex things, but it's just what are the things like recreating the childhood I wish I had? What are some hobbies or activities that like just things that I'm curious about? Make space for your curiosity. And I've just like really started to pay attention. I do this as a journaling prompt of like what are the spaces, the activities, the environments, the people that I'm around that really feel like it really nourishes my cup and feels playful, feels desire, where I feel like that pleasure that has nothing to do with work. And I started making notes of like what those things were. And that kind of helps inform my menu. The other thing is I like to go to maybe 1 or 2 classes a month, like going to a sound bath class or going to a cooking class or taking a calligraphy class or taking a flower arrangement class. Like I need activities too. So I'm like the same way that y'all with kids be putting y'all kids in after school curricular activities, like make yourself an after work curricular activity list and just give yourself options to choose from. And that is really what I've been leaning into, because when I just have free time with no assignment, that's very difficult for me. Like I feel like I get kind of anxious and get kind of restless and will default and probably just go shopping and like just go walk around the grocery store or go to the mall and walk around Zara or like whatever. And I'm like, okay, that's not necessarily the default pattern I want to have when I feel that anxiety. So we need to replace it with something else. It could just be romanticizing while you cook dinner, turning on the record player and lighting a candle and, FaceTiming your girlfriend when you're just like preparing dinner. Like that could be an after work activity. But for me, it's really just been like romanticizing like the mundane everyday things and like coming up with a menu of items, like 2 or 3 things every week that can be on my menu of like after work activities. And that's helped me so much. So yeah, that's how I've been navigating after work time. Let's see if there's anything else. Somebody asked about motherhood, preparation and planning. How are you preparing for motherhood? What does that look like? And y'all, I'm not pregnant, but I feel like I keep talking about like I'm building my business with babies in mind. That's probably one of the first things I've done in regards to preparation for motherhood is just redesigning my business to have the cognitive and physical space load to be responsible for another human. So that's been a really big and intentional constraint. Because when I look at all of my clients who do have kids, many of them are working part-time hours. They're working like 20 to 30 hours in their business a week. Um, and that looks different depending on like how old their kids are and what season of motherhood they're in. But like, I was like, okay, like what would it look like if I redesigned my business for part-time hours, but I'm still able to take home similar profit to what I used to take home when I was running full time. So that was like a major intentional constraint that I put on my business as I've redesigned it. And it feels really good to like be functioning in that now. So that's one way I've been preparing for motherhood. The other thing is just like I've been doing a lot more strength training, prioritizing my fitness, prioritizing my nutrition, taking prenatal vitamins, getting my labs done, like getting my normal general checkups, incorporating more WOMB, WOMB, womb wellness into my self-care practices. Kimmy Dole, if you guys do not follow her, child, she is just such an incredible human being. I've had the pleasure of knowing her now for about 5 years, and there's so much I've learned from her about womb wellness in a way that it's never been something that's like been on my radar, I guess, which sounds, I'm a woman, I have a womb, but because I don't have kids and like I've never really had negative or severe periods or anything like that, like I've never really prioritized my womb wellness. But now that I'm thinking about kids, it is something like, I'm like, what does it look like for me to care for my womb? What are the things I need to be talking to my OBGYN and my doctors about as it relates to my womb? What is the testing I need to be doing? So all of those things I feel like are things I'm just being very proactive in my health. And things that I hear my friends talk about, even though like all my friends who've had kids never did any of these things in preparation and they're fine, like their kids are fine. They had fine deliveries and things like that. So I might be overboarding it, but I'm just like, you have this free time. Like, what does it look like just for you to nurture and fuel your body in a really loving way? Because you have the resources and you have the space to do it. So again, strength training has been really important for me. I'm almost mid-30s, in my mid-30s. Girl. So I'm just like, I know muscle retention is really important as you age. Increasing my protein intake, increasing my fiber intake, making sure I'm hydrated, doing more pelvic floor exercises as part of my strength training practices, mobility and lengthening exercises. I've been using this app called Be the Method, and I really love it. It is phenomenal if you like Pilates and you like strength training. I feel like it's like a really good merger of the two, in addition to like mobility, lengthening, pelvic floor. Like I feel like it's like a really good all-in-one system. And so I've been really loving that. And that's like $17.99 a month or something. It's been money well spent. Like I said, I'm taking prenatal vitamins. And I think even just, I very rarely drink alcohol anyways, but like pretty much have cut that out for the most part. So yeah, I've just been like, I think my preparation for motherhood has just been like, how can my body be in the best state possible before I get pregnant? How can my business be in the most amount of support to the type of lifestyle and options I want to have available before I get pregnant? And then I just think about like, I feel like those two things have been probably the biggest things. And then also like the work that I'm doing on relationship with grief and just like learning how to regulate my nervous system. I feel like that has been really, really important to me because the more research I do just about children and your job as a parent, especially in those early years, is that your kids have no skills on how to regulate their emotions and their nervous system. And that's like a huge responsibility for you as a parent, is to teach your children how to regulate their nervous system. And from the research I've done, and a lot of what I hear from other parents is like one of the best ways to teach your kids how to self-regulate is first starting with you knowing how to self-regulate. So that's really been like probably the third way I've been kind of preparing for motherhood is, Jerisha, you need to develop the skill set of learning how to regulate yourself, because one day you not only need to be able to regulate yourself in the midst of a moment, but you need to also be able to model that for another human being so that you can teach them how to do that for themselves. So those have been the three things I've been doing to prep for motherhood. So yeah, I say those are all the good, juicy questions that I got. I mean, there's a ton of questions about messaging and positioning and establishing yourself as an authority in the industry and program promise and better articulating your value. And y'all, that is why I am creating this messaging course, how to market like a CEO. You can get on the wait list, I'll link it in the show notes. But this is the first time I've created a program and really documented specifically just the skill set of messaging, and really from the lens and the point of view as an individual that sells intellectual property, and from the lens of somebody who is not an influencer or a content creator. Like, I think there's a lot of marketing courses out here, and there's a lot of like content creation material out here. Like, how do you make reels? How do you go viral? How do you pick trending audio? And there's a lot of marketing courses on how do you build funnels? How do you run webinars? How do you run launches? But I don't really see a lot of education out here on like the thing that's in the middle. A lot of these are like the formats and formulas, but the thing that influences the effectiveness of any of these assets is the messaging. It is how you are able to articulate your point of view. And when you are a personal brand, when you're selling your own intellectual property, it is like you have to figure out more of this identity-based messaging stuff, regardless of what platform or what format you're posting in. It is, what are you saying? What is your perspective? What is your point of view? What aspects of your identity do you feel comfortable monetizing? And where is the congruency and the alignment that needs to hit for the level of perceived risk your buyers feel as it relates to the offer that you are selling? So all of those questions I'm going to be answering in this new program that I'm rolling out. I do invite you to join the waitlist. If you do join the waitlist, you do get exclusive access to the very first lesson of the very first module as like an early treat for you. So I do hope that you get that and enjoy that until the course rolls out. But yeah, I hope. And this was a good catch up. And if you're interested in more of this conversation about identity-based messaging and how do you close the perception gap and how do you lean more into articulating not just your value, but showcasing your identity through your messaging, and how do you refine your messaging to be relevant with what your audience needs right now, I look forward to seeing you in the upcoming episodes. So thanks for being here. Thanks for rocking with me. Thanks for honoring my pace as much as I'm learning how to honor it myself. And I will talk to you in the next episode.